And here we are live in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What's up, everybody? It's Dan from Atlas Lens Co. Happy Telecast Tuesday, no matter where you are in the world. We're joined with fantastic technical production from B. We've got Joshua, fresh back from a little visit to Korea. We've got Aldous. Thank you for handling the comment section, keeping the technical production on the back end tight. And we have a fantastic guest today. Everyone give a warm welcome to cinematographer John Pears.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming in. So for those of you who don't know, John has been a frequent collaborator and a good friend. And like all good relationships these days, John and I met online. So not through a dating app, but through purchasing some gear. So you were selling a Sony OLED monitor.
Yep.
For a very fair price. And I met you over on the west side of Los Angeles, collected the monitor, and we became fast friends. I was like,
yep.
Wow, you look like you're up to some really cool stuff here, creating some content, managing a lot of people, and you've got gear that you're liquidating. And, you know, that's something I frequently would do in my personal life, is like acquire gear, use it, and then flip it. And so we bonded over, you know, cameras, cinematography,
yep.
lighting, and John's been a frequent collaborator with the Atlas brand since the very beginning.
There's a piece of the Atlas story in that first meeting, because sold you the monitor, and you happened to say to me, "Oh, I have an anamorphic lens company," and my internal reaction was like, "Of course you do." Like,
BS, right? Like, sure.
And you're like, "No, I'm going to have the lenses soon. You know, they're going to come, and you should shoot with them." And I'm like, "Okay, yeah, well, you let me know when they're here, and then I'll shoot with them." And you did. 2 months later, you sent me a message, and you said, "Come and film with them." You rented that space just east of downtown. I think I had an Alexa SXT at the time. Threw it on. We had no idea what we were doing. We just played around, and the play around from that day ended up being the header video on Atlas's website for a good 2 years.
Yes, thank you. It was beautiful.
It was a good time. It was a good time, yeah.
And I think that really speaks to, in many ways, why Atlas exists and how Atlas exists. So for those of you who know me, and so for some of those of you who don't know me, my general approach to life is to kind of come in with curiosity and ask a lot of crazy questions, poke at things, pull at things, and try to find out why things are happening, or try to understand what is happening, what's happened before, and just approach life with curiosity. So I was a very curious child. I still am a very large curious child in many ways now. So thank you for your patience with this large curious child you're dealing with. And I just like to have fun and learn things and share the things that I learn and learn from others all the time. So, you know, that's really the journey of how Atlas started. Is I saw a movie, the movie Punch Drunk Love, with the fantastic work of Robert Elswit, ASC, Paul Thomas Anderson, Adam Sandler. I saw that film. I said, why does this film make me feel something? And so I just dug deeper, pulled at that thread of that sweater, and eventually pulled the sweater apart, finding out that it was filmed with Panavision C-Series anamorphic lenses, yep. Which made me ask the question, why these lenses? Why do these lenses exist? Why did Robert Elswit choose to use these lenses? Why did Paul Thomas Anderson choose to use these lenses? Why does this movie look this way? And I think that the thesis of what I could come up with after all this time is by looking at the past and looking at what's happening around us, we can have a better understanding of who we are, where we are now, and then maybe have a better opportunity to change the direction of the future. Whether that's something in our personal lives, whether that's in cinematography, whether that's in health. You know, I went through a big transformation in my health journey, and I had to ask myself, why did I end up in this situation? And you were a great resource and person I could lean on and talk to about that. You provided me a lot of comfort and support during that time, so I really appreciate that. And so here we are. I think I really appreciate you as a friend and as a collaborator. And how are you feeling today? I mean, you recently made a pretty interesting film that we could talk about too, if you want.
I do. We'll get to that, but I want to stay on the knowledge aspect and the information that you mentioned, because it's not just information for information's sake and an appreciation of the past and what came before, because that's how people connect in the film industry. We talk about what we love in films and stuff, which is always a bit retrospective. It has to be, because it has to have already been made. But you have such a good respect and reverence for the history of things, of how we got to where we are today. And Atlas, you could argue in many ways, and the physical product pays homage to a lot of that history. How do you rank order the historical knowledge of cinema versus how do you take it into the future? How do you sort of see the relationship between what has come before and where you can take it?
I have to lean on another great inspiration for thinking, right? So one of those greats is a product manager who used to work at Google named Tom Chi. So Tom Chi, one of his phrases is, "Knowing is the enemy of learning." So if you know everything, you're more resistant to learning. And so it's kind of this paradox. But I believe that learning is actually more important than knowing, because you might believe that you're right, but you have to always challenge your own beliefs and question. So it's sort of this cyclical quest, right, where we're digging, we're mining, we're kind of prospectors looking at the past for information for what's come before. And then my belief is that by looking at what's happened before, it'll give us guidance to where we are now. So it's very easy to be living in this time and be confused about where we are, what are our opportunities, what are the things that are preventing us from succeeding. And I think looking at a retrospective, as you said, of history gives us a chance to kind of affect where we are now better and have a better stance for where we are. But do you want me to dig into that in terms of anamorphic lenses, or?
I think we should, because I think a lot of what Atlas respects is that history. But I would pose the question to you, if you think of the modern film gear industry we live in, it's all about the new stuff. What's coming out new, test this against that. Why should anybody care or think of the past when it comes to anamorphic, the history of it?
Fair question. So to be even more provocative, why should we even care about anamorphic lenses, maybe? Or
yeah.
So why? Yeah, going to that why, right? Like why?
What? Yeah. What does the history of things have to offer, and how is it tangible for people today to do what they do?
Wonderful. Let's dig right into it. So, if we look back to when anamorphic lenses came to prominence in Hollywood filmmaking, which is the early 1950s, people were stopping going to the movies. So people had stopped going to the movies, and they were watching the streaming service that had just come into their home, which many of us know as television.
Yep.
Right? So they were all watching the Netflix of their time, not getting out of the house, not buying a hot dog and a popcorn and taking their whole family to the movies. They would just watch entertainment at home. And one of the big challenges to the financial viability for the studios and for the theater chains was not just that people had stopped going to the movies, but that licensing and distribution agreements hadn't quite been figured out in terms of equitability for streaming these movies on television. So people were actually showing movies, old movies on television, and the rights and licensing hadn't been figured out to give people the residuals for their work.
Sounds familiar.
Sounds kind of familiar, right? So there you have a direct parallel between what was happening over 70 years ago and
today.
something that's happening today
Yeah.
in Hollywood and beyond, where we have the unfortunate situation with the writers' strike and the directors' strike. I mean, writers and the
Actors.
actors' strike.
Yeah.
My bad.
Yeah.
And it's really important that people receive fair pay for hard work, and it's not just those people doing that work that are affected, but the entire chain of production that exists. So that goes for the studios, that goes for the theaters and the distributors, that goes for the people in set lighting, the people in costumes, the people in makeup. Everyone is affected by the chain that makes up our line of work. And I feel so fortunate that what we do, this is our work, right? So our work is, for the most part, fun. We're not at risk unless there's something dangerous happening on set, which we should always take into consideration. We're making something that's primary purpose is to inspire, entertain, and inform. And that's a really awesome blessing to have, right? So we get to work in something really cool, but we also have to look out for each other as best as we possibly can, because things can be dangerous, physically dangerous. They can be financially dangerous, like we're in now. We're in a financially risky time. And so those people in the 1950s, the studios, the theaters, and everybody involved in making movies were in some ways at risk because of a new venue for entertainment to be shown, which is a great opportunity. So there's always this balance of what's fantastic with new technology and new opportunities, but also how do we meet those with present concerns and needs of people, because this is a people business at the end of the day. So the studios were saying, well, how do we get people to come back to the movies? Because everybody's content watching TV, but financially this is not necessarily figured out. And they'd said, well, something that has always worked is something sensational, something spectacular, and larger than life. And that's really one of the major purposes of a theater, is to have something that's immersive and larger than life that brings you into entertainment.
I guess for context, the theaters weren't battling against a 65-inch plasma. They were battling against
A 6-inch
Yeah.
RCA
yeah, exactly.
tube, right?
Exactly.
But even then, even with a 65-inch or 80-inch TV, I myself love the experience of going to the
Yeah,
movies. I
yeah.
think most of us, there are a lot of conveniences of staying home and watching entertainment at home. But with a really great film, something that's just mind-blowingly immersive or spectacular, shout out Gareth Edwards, Greg Fraser, Oren Sofer, the creator.
Yes.
That was a visual tour de force.
Yeah.
It was a treat. Saw it in IMAX in the theater, and what a fantastic opportunity to leave the house, get out, and definitely put my phone away. Don't get the phone out or be distracted.
Yep.
And just be immersed in this experience. So that immersion sense is sort of the real original purpose of anamorphic imaging. But there's more to it, because the original way that they thought of making immersive panoramic movies was to use 3 cameras side by side. So they'd have 3 cameras in an array, and then they'd show with 3 projectors a panoramic triple screening, right? And that was called Cinerama. So big shout out, Cinerama Dome. I know you're going to come back one of these days. Anybody who's been to the ArcLight has probably seen, ArcLight Theater in Los Angeles has seen the Cinerama Dome, which is, the birthplace in many ways of that immersive panoramic screen experience. But the problem was it's expensive to run 3 times as much film and to run 3 projectors and have to outfit a theater as such. And so
Technical execution of that too must just have been an absolute headache.
the synchronization of the
Yep.
cameras, the synchronization of the projectors. And so in many ways, Anamorphic is the simplified way of creating a panoramic movie screening using a standard camera and a standard projector, with the only technical changeover being the lens. So you'd use a lens that would compress the horizontal angle of field onto a square piece of film, and then use that same type of lens to project it back out into widescreen.
So for Cinerama to work, it was shot with 3 cameras too, right? Which had to have been an absolute nightmare as well, trying to shoot a film with 3 cameras in an array.
Yeah, this is not like 3 Sony FX3s. We're talking about 3 Mitchell cameras.
Small cars.
And they don't have reflex viewfinders most likely, so they're lining up parallax viewing with 3 cameras. And it's a huge challenge. That was a huge challenge for them to face technically, financially. And so, Anamorphic kind of simplifies that concept. So big shout out to French optician Henri Chrétien, who had originally developed this optical concept to see a wider angle field of view during World War I for periscope viewfinders on a tank. So they'd know if Germans are going to attack from the left or the right side of the tank when they only have a single eyepiece that can't really pan.
Well, I didn't know that. That's
Yeah.
where it came from.
Yeah, so it started with, unfortunately, like a wartime situation.
Yeah.
But the whole concept of anamorphosis or intentional distortion for perspective dates back to art history. So again, we can go, you could always ask why 5 times, right? And go further back, why? Well, if we look back at ancient art history, if you're standing in the Sistine Chapel, for instance, you have to be standing in a certain position to see the art the way that it's meant to be. But if you looked at it straight on, everything is kind of stretched and warped.
Right.
And you can find this in many cases of historical paintings. And then there's another case where you can actually encode a hidden message in artwork that looks sort of like a flowing cloud. And then with a cylindrical mirror, you can actually decode the hidden message. And so that was a way of hiding illicit artwork or hidden messages in something that just looks like a cloud pattern. So people as far back as ancient China would hide hidden messages in these pieces of artwork and then decode them with something that only magistrates would have access to,
Right.
Which would be a highly polished cylindrical mirror. And so the sort of concept dates way back, but Henri Chrétien is in many ways the father of modern optical anamorphosis for imaging, and originally for wartime use during World War I. And then he somewhat successfully marketed that for movies in France after that. And there were several improvements on the technology, like up through the 1930s. There was a patent filed called the Newcomer patent, which is actually the core technology behind the original Orion series lenses, where you have a focusing lens, then you have an anamorphic group and a primary lens group. And so the focusing lens actually exists in the front, and that group is collimating the light rays, focusing either at infinity or at different focus positions before that, and then shaping that beam angle into the rest of the optical package. So there's several different ways to focus an anamorphic lens, but that Newcomer patent is, the core technology behind an Orion series. And interestingly enough, the lenses that were adopted in Hollywood, the Bosch and Lomb CinemaScope Baltars, created by 20th Century Fox with a license from Henri Chrétien, didn't use that. They used a synchronized focusing method where the anamorphic group is focusing and the primary lens group is focusing. And it was really challenging to use because first they made it as an adapter. So you'd start with a regular lens and then camera assistants would have to focus that in one direction. I don't know why they didn't make it the same focus direction, but you'd focus one way and then you'd have to focus the other lens the other way, asynchronously and in opposite directions. So it's kind of like trying to shift 2 gear shifts on a car at the same time. And needless to say, camera assistants hated that because they'd be watching dailies and the DP would smack them on the back of the head, knock the cigar out of their mouth and say, your shot's out of focus. And they went back to the drawing board, and actually some of the world's first computer-aided lens design was done for the Bosch and Lomb integrated CinemaScope Baltars. So that's when a computer was, the size of this whole building that we're in right now, and they'd have to program the computer with punch cards, so it wasn't, quite like opening the computer and just starting ray tracing analysis like we do now. So if you think about how much suffering these people had to go through, it's partly schadenfreude, right? We can kind of laugh at it a little bit, but it also makes you say, well, we're really fortunate to have the conveniences that we do. But they went through all of these struggles just to make a movie panoramic, right? And then what's crazy is that now we don't even need lenses like this to make a panoramic movie. We have, you know, 4K, 6K, 8K, 12K sensors with a ton of dynamic range and a ton of resolution. And we can extract any aspect ratio we want from that native sensor. And big shout out to Rick Darge and Slugen Flugen for your film about aspect ratios. So Google that. We'll put it in the comments if you want to find it. But Rick Darge made a great film about all the different aspect ratios. It's hilarious. And you don't need a lens to make a special aspect ratio these days. But we choose these lenses because it became part of cinema for the previous 70 years. With not only those early CinemaScope Baltars with films like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, films like Rebel Without a Cause that really defined Hollywood in the mid-1950s and beyond, but all the way through the advent of Panavision, which is really what I would consider the dominant art form for anamorphic photography in movies.
Yeah.
Because of their auto Panatar system, which allows you to get really good close-ups without having people's faces distorted in close-up, which is one of the primary problems of a CinemaScope Baltar from the 1950s.
I've shot with them, and yeah, it's like someone's melted the image, for want of a better description. You know, you get, was it the mumps they called it?
The mumps, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So with the quick sort of tangent, you mentioned we have 4K, 6K, 8K, 12K sensors, and we can get don't have to use an anamorphic lens to get a panoramic image. Could you explain the differences between shooting a panoramic image spherically versus using an anamorphic lens to achieve the same result? What's the, one's an optical process, one's an extraction.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things happening, and I think Lena Sandgren said this best just the other day when he was visiting us. You really want to choose the image for how it makes you feel, right? And with an anamorphic lens, that distortion that is changing the entire geometry of the image as it comes into the camera,
Yeah.
it might be slightly more human in a way because you have two different perspectives being melded into one. And that's sort of akin to the way the human eye sees. If we're fortunate enough to have binocular vision, our brains are taking two images, one from each eye, and then melding that image together. And so we're getting essentially twice as wide of a horizontal field of view as a vertical field of view. But there's a lot of things happening in the overall creation of that image. There's zones of quality, of focus, that our brain is multiplexing from our two eyes. And so you have sort of regions of interest that have best focus and then less good focus, but kind of suggestion of presence, right?
Yep.
And in many ways, an anamorphic lens, intentionally or unintentionally, resembles that type of focus, I would say. So, and some of us are born with anamorphic eyes. What I mean by that is that an anamorphic lens works by having a different plane of focus between the sagittal rays and the tangential rays. So the vertical and the horizontal fields are being focused at different rates. And the same is true for not only having binocular vision, but the shapes of our corneas can actually be different from person to person. So we can have either a perfectly radially symmetrical lens, which would be like a spherical lens, which is, you know, perfectly the same radially, it's symmetrical. Or you might have a more toroid shape, which is more how an anamorphic lens is shaped, where part of the surface is aspheric in a nonlinear progression. And so it might be more of a cylindrical shape. And so we can correct that in our vision if we have cylindrical curvature to our eyeglasses or to our contact lenses. and that's part of correcting the image, right? And then there's also sort of the imperfections or the aberrations created by that. And so the imperfections that are in an anamorphic lens that you simply can't correct out for technical reasons, leave it with tool marks of the process. And I'd say that those tool marks leave us feeling, in many ways, maybe a more human or more personal relationship to the image. And that's like a poetic way of saying, hey, it's not perfect, but that imperfection might make it tastier, right? So we get more flavor from it. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing. So if somebody says, hey, would you use an anamorphic lens for every film and every project? Me, personally, I would if I was given the choice because I like how it looks. But is it technically the best choice? Probably not. We have to be real and truthful and honest with ourselves.
Yep.
If we're looking for perfect accuracy of representing life as it truly is, maybe not.
Right.
But if we're looking to create some personality, some interest, some intrigue, and maybe build a stronger relationship on a personal level with the image, I believe that anamorphic imaging is one great way of doing that because it is more personal. It's more like a human eyesight in some ways.
And how does all of that translate into physically manufacturing a lens?
That's a great question. It's so hard. So, I mean, you remember at the very early days and when we very first met, we were talking about it and it was just talk because we were working on prototypes. So I don't think I'd even completed the prototypes when you and I first talked.
You hadn't, you were like a couple of
We're in the process of
months
building
away
them,
from
right?
it.
Yeah. So
I think you removed the plastic off of some of the lenses when we first shot them.
yeah,
Actually.
like the protective
Yeah.
coating.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like you have this ideal, right? There's this Mount Olympus ideal that we have in our minds of what things should be.
Right.
And so, again, looking at the past, right? Like these ancient Greek scholars envision this idea of there's this perfect place. It's a virtual place that maybe doesn't actually exist, but let's pretend that it does. And in this place, everything is perfect, right? And so we're just aspiring to this perfection level.
Yep.
But stoically, we know we'll never get there. So how do we accept that, right? So I think that the question is, what is a good stoic balance between what you believe is the best possible right answer and then actually moving forward one small step at a time. And so if there was any inspiration that I was going to give to anyone out there on the stream today is that don't be afraid to take those first steps in the direction of what you hope to achieve. If you're hoping to achieve something good for yourself, for others, search yourself, search your heart, and ask yourself, is this something that is good for me? Is this good for others? And if you believe that it is after weighing that, don't be afraid to start taking steps towards it. And don't be so hard on yourself if you don't achieve anything that first day, as long as you start with that intention of moving towards what you think is the right direction. And don't hesitate to take those steps. So
from that, I'm assuming
we will make missteps all the time. I made a lot recently, just this week, just yesterday.
you mentioned you talking about the missteps. So, what would you consider a misstep when you first developed the Orions?
Ooh, you cut right to the core. What would be a misstep in developing the Orion series lenses? Wow.
Because my first experience of shooting with them that day, I remember it quite well.
Yeah, tell us.
Because I had an SXT Alexa that had open gate, and all of a sudden we were beyond. If you do the full sensor width, you were beyond a 240 image. You're into this sort of almost a 3:1, I think.
Yeah, if you use the whole 3:2 aspect ratio sensor, if I'm thinking of it right.
Yeah, and that blew me away. I'm like, okay, now we're into something I haven't seen before. But given the technology that existed at the time, there's now this new way to experience an image. That was what instantly ignited my interest. And then when we did the little edit of it and did the 240, I remember being disappointed that we were chopping off so much of either or. So that stumbling across something which I didn't really know was possible until you just sort of marry the two things together. But arguably, I could look back at that now and be like, well, that was maybe like a bit of a misstep, because there are traditional ways of shooting anamorphic lenses, and given the technology we have, we can go beyond it. Very small misstep, but from a feeling point of view, to your comment with Linus, it just felt right to go beyond that and to suddenly see the world in this sort of more of a slit. But
I think my biggest regret is not working faster and harder. I mean, I thought I worked as hard as I could at that time.
well, yeah,
But
I can say, because knowing what you know now, you wish you could have gone quicker, or
I think what I know about myself now is that I'm always capable of more than I thought I was. So I thought, well, this is all that I can do for now, so just do this. And I think that's a good start. But I think that in retrospect, I wish I'd realized and believed in myself even more, realizing this would be so popular, because I was fairly cautious, to be honest. I said, well, let's build something that I think I like, and hopefully other people like it. And then people did like it. And I think our biggest problem in the outset was people liked it so much that we weren't prepared for the demand.
right.
And we weren't actually prepared for that demand for like over 2 years. And so I think if I could go back and tell myself something, it would be to figure out how to hire more people on the team who have deeper experience beyond, I had experience, but not experience manufacturing lenses. And we had people experienced in lens manufacturing, but I think we needed more people with deep experience, which can also be a burden sometimes, because if people are too experienced, they'll say, that'll never work. Like, based on everything that I've done in the past, that'll never work. So they can be resistant sometimes, and that's what I mean by knowing is the opposite of learning, like Tom Chi said. If you know something won't work because you tried it in the past, you're less likely to try it again or to try a different approach. That's unless you're open to that, right? So you have to say, well, it didn't work this time, but if we change our approach, and I think that's the missing component of the scientific method to progressing, right? Is you say, well, I tried that and it didn't work. And I think that's where you have to say, why? Why didn't it work? You have to ask, why didn't it work? And then take note, why didn't that work? And that's kind of the missing gap in scientific method that has always existed, but that we often don't take that path of, as you said, retrospective enough.
Yeah.
Why didn't it work? Let's dig into that deeper. Let's ask why again. Maybe 5 times if we have to. Why?
And how much of that was lack of experience for you, or self-doubt and not trusting your gut?
It's a good question. I think I was just overwhelmed. So I think there were other things happening that were making me think about other things. And so how many plates, can one person spin, or even 3 people spin, even well-rested, well-fed, and otherwise happy? How possible is it to do all the things? And I think for that reason, I don't really have any regrets, but I think learning what I've learned is that there are always ways to approach things differently than what was done. And I think it's just about finding the time to ask why.
Yeah.
So if you can find the time to ask yourself why, or ask other people why, don't hesitate to take that opportunity to ask.
But sitting here today, and you think back on 6, 7 years now, I think it's 6, 7 years that we first met in February. So next February, I think it could be 7 years maybe. When you look back on the Atlas journey, with some of what we chatted about with the history of Anamorphic. How do you, that's not necessarily grade yourself, but how do you, what perspectives do you have now on the journey that you've had?
I would tell myself, try to enjoy it more.
Yeah.
I'd tell myself to wear more sunscreen. So wear sunscreen. Exercise, take better care of your body, because eventually your body will stop working correctly and then your mind will stop working correctly if you don't take good care of those things. So don't neglect yourself. And I think if I'd fixed those things sooner, I probably could have had more energy to do the other things to make the lenses better and faster and build a team faster and stronger. But yeah, it's, we can't live a life of regret. I think we just have to say, given that I'm wearing my sunscreen now. I'm well rested. I had a good solid 7 hours of sleep. I exercised this morning. I had no food because I'm fasting, which feels good. But I'm excited for lunch.
And the thing you created in Atlas, or co-created in Atlas, created in Atlas with, is now being used on every type of production out there.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that excites me is waking up and seeing what new footage is coming in from Vietnam, from Malaysia, from Singapore, from Kazakhstan, from Wyoming, from around the world, everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
And seeing people empowered to make really moving images, not just moving pictures, but moving images on the heart level, and see their excitement in doing so, and see that they're excited to share their experience with other people, and hopefully it's made their path more exciting and more personal and more rewarding.
And then yesterday you had Linus Sangren here, right? I met him actually at your previous office. I think that was pre-Babylon, and you guys were chatting with him. What's that like to, you start out making a lens company and then the people who you look up to as filmmakers are now coming to you, collaborating with you, and then not just once, but they're coming back to you again and again and again to keep working with you. What's it like working with someone like Linus, and how does that work between a lens manufacturer and a DP?
I think that the secret is that these people don't end up being lauded for just their fantastic work, which is beautiful. But the reality is that the reason that they were able to move into positions of success is that at their heart, they're good people.
Right.
And so they have a really good nature, a curiosity. That was one of the key things that I see in filmmakers like Gareth Edwards, is like a natural curiosity about life and about the world and about why films are made the way they are. And the same is true of Linus and these people who are award-winning. They didn't just make award-winning films because they're talented, which they are immensely talented, but they became capable of doing their best work because they are kind-hearted. They're approaching with curiosity and gathering, learning, and then turning that learning and catalyzing it into the power to change filmmaking and the power to tell stories and work with collaborators, different directors, different cinematographers, to tell those stories in a way that's meaningful and impactful and award-winning, for lack of a better explanation. But I would say it's no accident that these people have succeeded and become their best selves. And I think that my mission as a person is to figure out how to be my best self, but also figure out how to make this company empower people to make great films, or communicate greatly with imaging, because it's always been a passion of mine to experience the world as it is in a special way. Like, I feel light just speaks to me, so I'll be in a place, and I'll see the way that the lighting is interacting with the environment, and it makes me feel something. And I've always wanted to communicate that through my work as a camera person. And I think that there's just a great shared human experience in that kind of imaging. You know, I like to think that photography and cinematography are in some ways like the next best thing to psychic communication, right? They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and words are great descriptors, but a picture can put you in the mind of another person for a brief moment, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think being able to take that teleportation, mental teleportation, and visualize something that someone can then experience your point of view, and especially in this time, it's such an important thing for us to remember, like with the different crises that are happening around the world, the way people are treating each other. Try to envision what others are going through. And that can be painful for a little bit, but try to just have that empathy by seeing it their way, for lack of a better explanation. And I don't want to harp on this too much, but basically, if you can see the world through someone else's eyes, maybe you can understand them better as a person and then relate to them, and then that is maybe a way forward for peace. Because we have different perspectives, but we are all human, and you know, none of us wants to die, and none of us should want to kill.
Yeah.
So a little bit heavy in the heart there, but I think it's important to address it. You know,
It's an interesting time right now.
Challenge. I mean,
both locally and distantly.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's one of the cool things is that as image makers, we have the power to, it is maybe our superpower to be able to help tell stories and through stories bridge the gap between different ideas and synthesize those ideas in a way that creates a dialogue and creates better understanding. It's that learning thing, but just visual.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, take that hopefully as some inspiration out there, as something you can lean on to move forward. Use it as fuel to move forward in a good way.
I guess Atlas is somewhat living proof of taking a really big swing and just committing and trusting that maybe there's something there can actually deliver something pretty fun.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a huge thing. I mean, I'm going to turn the mic around on you for a second. And, you know, to this point, I think, you know, with the change of technology, recently you were able to work on a project filmed in conjunction with Canon and I believe OWC.
Yep.
And Tilta. I can't wait to show the world through your eyes on that journey. And you know, if we look at retrospectively the history, it's such an interesting piece because it's about humans taking flight, right? And on the simplest level, it's about leaving the earth and freeing our soul and flying around at a basic level.
Yeah, yeah. We on the technology point of view, I don't want to give too much away from the shoot because it's going to come out soon in the next few weeks, as I understand it. But if you go back just 5 years ago, there were certain things that you could do anamorphically. You could probably do a lot more things anamorphically, but the amount of infrastructure you needed to execute was substantial. Even mounting what we did with the 25mm with the car, even the amount of mounting stuff we had to do for that was not small because you have the 25, which is quite a big lens. We had it on a Komodo and still had it quite small, but there was still some rigging challenges. But then with Mercury coming out, it frees you up into this different level of, oh, well, where could you put it? You know, cameras are only getting smaller, it would seem, and Mercury is a small, lightweight lens comparative to a full-size 2x anamorphic lens. So the question was, what could you then go and do with it? And we went to Europe. We met up with a glider pilot who is over there, gliders, for anybody who doesn't know, are very weight-sensitive aircraft. They're built for efficiency. Every square inch is thought through to making the aircraft fly, not where could you mount a camera. So we had some shots in mind that we thought we could go and get using an aircraft, using a glider, sorry. In the Alps, gliders don't fly in perfect zero wind conditions. They need thermals, they need wind for uplift, so they fly in conditions which are a bit more changeable. And we put some cameras in some interesting places up there. And it's not like a debatable thing. It would not have been possible if something like Mercury didn't exist and some of the smaller cameras from Canon didn't exist. There's no way you could have done this 5 years ago in the same way that we did it. So.
Just in terms of creating that dynamic sense of perspective, right? And that massive sense of perspective, because I mean, it would be probably no problem to throw a GoPro in there or an iPhone, which are fantastic imaging tools.
Yep.
But the sense of scope and scale and presence of anamorphic imaging and the larger format sensor that you were using simply wouldn't have been there with those tools. Not to say anything bad about those tools, but just that it's a different scope of possibility.
What you were talking about with the Baltars and the original French anamorphic process, every lens sees light differently. So yes, can you get a camera into a position on an aircraft? Yes, you can. Can you get the same look from the lens? No, you can't. Every lens is different. Every lens is going to treat light differently. It's going to transfer light differently. It's going to respond to the sun differently. It's going to respond to a side flare differently. So it's not just, in addition to that sort of scope you get from, we'll be shooting full frame cameras up there, and obviously the Mercury cover full frame, so it's not only getting that size of an image at the 36 on a full frame, you're getting a lot of the world in an image. So you're not only getting that, but it's also how the Mercuries respond to light, which make it all a very unique image, in my opinion. So
I'm really excited for everyone to see your work again on the big screen.
It was good fun, and obviously thanks to Atlas for the opportunity to go up there. And Stefan, the pilot, was great to work with. Stefan Lange, he has a very good YouTube channel. Everyone should go check out his YouTube.
Shout out, Stefan.
Stefan, yeah. But it was a great experience being up there. A lot of variables, a lot of hanging out of helicopters over the Alps, and just an amazing experience. And to your earlier point, with thanks to Canon and Tilta and OWC and Core and all these partners who came on board to help make it significantly easier than it would have otherwise been. So yeah, I can't wait.
Super cool.
Yeah.
So I think in the last 2 minutes here, we'll just see if there's any questions from anyone on the stream. Thank you so much for tuning in to this conversation with John Pears and myself on a lovely Tuesday. If there's no questions, happy to peace out, but let's see if there's anything that we want to pop in with. Aldous, Joshua, B, do we have any questions out there?
Earlier, I just want to clarify, earlier you were talking about how the workload was too much and you expect everyone to like a lens at first. You're talking about the Orions, right?
Yeah. I guess I didn't learn my lesson because we're currently in a similar situation with Mercury lenses where we're working just as hard as we possibly can to get everyone's Mercury lenses shipped to them as soon as they possibly can be, and it's just not fast enough. But I still take heart. I showed up today. I'm here to help make sure that happens. So right after this, I'm going right into a meeting to help pitchfork that process into happening even faster, and you'll see shout out Angelo, who we've got currently shackled to the desk, who's in the newsletter. Send Angelo Halloween candy to fuel him because we're not feeding him anything else.
Opinions on anamorphic adapters versus lenses?
Opinions on anamorphic adapters instead of lenses. Well, I mean, I can speak on that directly because that's part of the reason we started this company and didn't make an adapter company. I think it's a really cool way to learn about what anamorphic imaging can be, but I think when you're on a film set and you're trying to make a movie, back in 1952, they learned the hard way that using an adapter to make a movie just ain't it. It's just not reliable, not dependable, not durable enough for the rigors of on-set film processes. But if you're by yourself and you're just willing to deal with it, you can make beautiful imagery, and I think that's a great opportunity. So there's a reason we don't sell anamorphic adapters here. One more.
What is the most unique shot with an anamorphic lens that you've seen?
What is the most unique shot with an anamorphic lens that I've seen? What do you want to answer that one?
Just 50 just came into my head. I mean, wow.
I love it when a lens is super close to the actors, but you can see the environment. And if you're really crazy, then maybe that lens is like scraping along the pavement on a chase car and you're close to the vehicle. So you're getting this massive amount of perspective, forced perspective and motion and parallaxing. So anything where you're chasing people with a steady cam, like in Goodfellas, for instance, any Tarantino film. I mean, I think what makes anamorphic imaging with Tarantino films special is that they are obviously a Tarantino film, but at the same time, it's not that it's the most unique shot. It's that it feels familiar and yet different at the same time. And so I think there's sort of this sense of familiarity but difference that makes, it's those counterpoints that make anamorphic special, and that's why I love anamorphic imaging, because it's relatable to our notion of cinematic history. So if you flew to an alien planet and they'd never seen a movie before and you showed them an anamorphic movie and then you showed them a spherical movie, they'd be like, well, that was weird, first of all, because, you know, they might not be seeing in the same spectral range that we are. So it would be totally alien. But other than that,
Quite literally.
yeah, nice. Other than that, the context is simply not there. And so that's one of the reasons I always like to look at the past, is to have more context about the present and the potential of the future, right?
Yep.
And so I think part of the reason I love anamorphic imaging is that movies that I love, many of them were filmed with anamorphic lenses over the last 70 years. Movies like Blade Runner, movies like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, movies like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, movies like Raiders of the Lost Ark. The list could go on and on and on. Punch Drunk Love, There Will Be Blood. They each have unique subject matter, but there's a through plot that has to do with the way that the image is formed through the lens that makes it relatable and tickles the fuzzy part of my brain just right.
Yeah.
And that's what I like about them. So it's not necessarily about being the most unique, but it's about being styled in such a way that it feels delicious and different yet familiar.
Yeah, I think there's an element to it when I think of that question of one of the first images that came to my head is the shot of DiCaprio in Don't Look Up when he's in the bathroom hyperventilating. All of the classic anamorphic characteristics, so the easy giveaways, the lens flare, any sort of distortion at the edges, none of that's in that shot. It's just a shot telling the story. And it's just how they're using the space in the frame to tell the story. So using the anamorphic frame as a storytelling mechanism as opposed to any sort of epic, bombastic, sort of stylistic.
It's not about tricks, right? It's about
it's
just
the story.
solid movie making.
Yep. And
Yeah.
like we when you hear a DP say, well, we chose anamorphic because of these story-based reasons as opposed to, well, because it has a lens flare or has this or that. And, yeah.
Hopefully that answers the question. It can be both the basis, but also the spice of life.
Can it be?
All right, well, on that note, speaking of spice, why don't we have some lunch? Hope everyone's having a fantastic Tuesday out there. Again, thank you so much, B, for our technical production today. Thank you to Aldous and Joshua for heading up the back end of the stream here and communicating with everyone out there. And tremendous thank you to John Pears.
Thanks for having me.
Always a great collaborator. And we'll see you next Tuesday. Peace out.